Professor Spafford's in a faculty meeting, so for that end, I will be introducing our very distinguished speaker today, who's Mike Fleming. He is from the National Security Agency, as you see. He is the lead information assurance of the Information Assurance Solutions Group. And I emphasize lead because I asked him in the program, I don't know if you noticed, it said that he was the chief. And I said, "Are you the chief, Mike?" He didn't like that.
Not the chief.
So we decided we'd change it for today anyway. He's a Purdue graduate. He earned a undergraduate degree in EE here, electrical engineering, and he earned an MBA at Johns Hopkins thereafter. He was here in 1968, and he has told me that the campus looked exactly the same, and so did he. He is a Lafayette native, so this is home to him, and most importantly, he is a huge boiler backer. Please welcome Mike.
I'm going to use this or that. He wired me with this. Is this? Can you hear me all right with this?
Is that all right?
All right. Is this on? I'm not sure it is. I don't think so either. Let me try a switch. On? Okay. You hear me all right? I'll talk loud anyway. First of all, let me say how happy and proud I am to be here and to represent the National Security Agency at something so important as CERIAS. This is an impressive endeavor. Dr. Vic McConaughey, who's with me today, we spent yesterday evening and all today listening to the sessions that Gene Spafford put on, and I was duly impressed with the enthusiasm. In fact, second point I would make, that on a Friday afternoon at 4:30, the fact that this room is filled is a real testament to how important you feel that security is. And given that I've been in the security information assurance business for almost 30 years, the fact that my alma mater is so dedicated to such a topic is really heartwarming. For a long time I felt we were sort of sitting at the bottom of a well saying security is important, and no one was really listening. And clearly this crowd is listening and listening in a serious way. We're proud to be a Tier 1 sponsor for CERIAS. While it's not on your website yet, we're working on that. So that's, I think, a real plus to have a federal agency there. And I would like to extend Mike Jacobs' sincere regrets that he couldn't be there. For those who don't know, he's our boss. He underwent a bypass operation 2 weeks ago, and he was scheduled to be here. So we'll fill in for him. And it was really disappointed that he couldn't come out. But he sends his best to you and to the activity that you have here. What I thought we'd do today is, Andrew, you didn't take over my computer, did you? Something familiar about the colors anyway. Oh, all right, I see. I see what happened. Now we're back to 1968. And Professor Haight was head of the EE department, and Bob Greasy was the quarterback. Leroy Keys was playing both ways in football, so it's been a while, but I'm happy to be back. There are also some extra students here this afternoon. Some of us in the Fleming family were feared there wouldn't be anyone here, so we stacked the deck. When you see the pom-poms come up, they're my relatives, so and the hard questions will come from them, I'm sure. NSA has two hats. We perform two vital missions for this country. One of them is signals intelligence. It's the one that gets all the popular press. If you've seen some of the movies lately, no, we don't have cameras in lingerie shops as in the Enemy of the State might depict it, but we do have a foreign intelligence mission. It's called signals intelligence, SIGINT. I won't talk about that today, even though maybe a lot of questions are on your mind. Even if you bribe me with a autographed football by Drew Brees, I won't go there for certain. However, we will talk about information assurance, which is the other mission. And in today's state of widely interconnected telecommunications and computing, it I think is clearly the growth mission in this country and certainly at the National Security Agency. And it's the focus of your activities here as well. The Information Systems Security Organization of the National Security Agency, ISSO for short, is aimed at the following mission. Really to bring about the technology that can protect and defend U.S. communications while our focus is in the Department of Defense, as you'll see in a minute, the national security impact of our critical infrastructures, I think, clearly in today's environment goes well beyond the national defense community. We also, in the last 2 years, have added a mission called Defensive Information Operations. A little insight into that as we go through the talk today, but it's a more of an operations focus. Sort of picks up where intrusion detection leaves off. Professor Stafford. And really, those are the two elements that we subdivided our information assurance mission into. Protect and defend the network is the byword. A number of interlocking and critical to this nation's operation infrastructure. If you look at the pictures here, you can begin to think about what might happen if someone took down the financial structure. And I'm not talking about individual transactions, your local banking. I'm talking about the finance system or the energy system or the transportation or telecommunications and water, et cetera. In fact, if two of these, either the telecommunications or the power grid goes down, I think we have a national security event. So national security today is more than putting kinetic energy on targets. It's in fact protecting our way of life through our interdependencies on these systems, which all are interdependent on networked communications, networked computing. And so when you think about supervisory control systems such as SCADA systems, almost all of these are in fact vitally connected to that infrastructure. And if one of those goes down, the nation could be in trouble. I think it's important to note that this particular administration has taken on this activity in a serious way. Never before have we had a president of the United States talking about information assurance, infrastructure protection, and we have that in fact with today's administration. For those who don't know, earlier this year a national plan was published. It's on the web. I didn't bring a URL, but it would be easy to find, that talks about three particular segments of protection. The Department of Defense plan, a fairly high-level approach here, or high-level treatment, a federal sector plan, and then if you see at the bottom of this, it says an invitation for dialogue among the government and the private sector in terms of how one might bring synergy in protecting these critical infrastructures. So this administration is committed to this. I can also say that in the Department of Defense, and particularly John Hamre, who was until March 31st the Deputy Secretary of Defense, really has the message and drove the Defense Department in a very positive, forceful way to bringing about information assurance into in communications. He had a unique position prior to being the Deputy Secretary of Defense. He was, in fact, the comptroller and understood the power of paperless activity, paperless business. And so he brought together, I think at the first time at a very senior level, the idea of security as an enabler for paperless contracting, paperless business conduct. And I think that's a powerful way to think about security. So as you think about security today, rather than thinking about it as an add-on or something you have to do, I think to sell this on the outside of the knowing community that we have here, have to think about security as an enabling function. And that's a slightly different twist, but I think it's probably the way to make a business case for doing good security. In this plan, there are a number of responsibilities laid out. In particular, in the government, there's a mirror for all of those critical infrastructures. So Department of Treasury is involved with bringing awareness and activity in support of the financial community, Department of Transportation for transportation, Department of Energy for the energy sector, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a one-to-one map. And in the private sector, there was a request that certain information sharing and analysis centers be set up to mirror what the Federal Bureau of Investigation set up in their National Information Protection Center. These ISACs, or Information Sharing Analysis Centers, have been slowly being established. One was established by the banking community. I believe Steve Katz, who many of you have participated, been participants in your program here, was a force behind that, and also one has been set up for the Telecommunications Committee using a construct that had already been established, an advisory board of the President. So there's some slow movement in the private sector to set up data sharing and analysis centers. And hopefully over time that will grow as more confidence is brought about between the two communities. And I think that's the important ingredient here. Trust among these communities is vital. Now, if you want to look at this problem in a real brief technical sense, I'll put a simplified diagram up here, somewhat along the lines of one of the speakers this morning that, it's actually this afternoon, I think it was Clay, that talked about a simplified view of the world. He had hosts and routers. I've expanded the view slightly to at least give a sense for the need for protection in the telecommunications and transport world, the idea of some local environment where there's a policy barrier here. This is a security policy barrier that says, in theory, the owner of this system can establish a security policy and hopefully enforce it. Beyond this barrier, people are sort of at the mercy of someone else. And so this creates the interesting tension that we have in this world of networked computing, where I want to deal out here, but I don't really trust this space out here. And so I begin to think about boundary conditions and ultimately providing the right kind of protection. If you take that and put it into the negative space, if you like, the idea of a threat, clearly the world has for a long time, and this has been the bread and butter of our signals intelligence mission, doing passive collection of these links. But the advent of richly connected computing has, of course, brought about the very active kind of attacks where, in fact, instead of passively tapping lines and wires, people are now actively penetrating networks and causing malicious harm. And of course, the more insidious threat, the one that's actually very hard to deal with, and in some studies will say is as prevalent as any of the other two, are the insiders. People with certain privileges that for a variety of reasons, whether they want to do harm because the company has done harm to them or for a variety of reasons, they have sort of gone bad on the inside. And so there's a serious problem here that can't be ignored. Now, if you want to take information assurance and parse it down into some sort of bite-sized, what I'll call security services, one might talk about the idea of guaranteeing service, or the bad thing, countering denial of service. And so when we saw the eBay and the Yahoo attacks back in February, these were clearly denial of service kinds of attacks that the positive statement, security of service of availability, would be what one would use to counter that. When we talk about protecting data from malicious modification, the service is integrity. And authentication, knowing who the parties are in a transaction, vital in terms of many functions, including electronic commerce, access control, the idea of knowing who the party in the transaction is, or who the entity is, whether it's a human or a server, or routers authenticating each other in the backbone. A very powerful security service. Confidentiality, and I listed it down the list because our classic approach to security has been cryptography for confidentiality. That's been sort of the nature of security since essentially World War II up until the mid-'80s. And I put that down the list because while it's very important, it in some instances isn't as important as the ones above. And in fact, I can think of a contracting transaction where the government would want to enter into a contract, issue a request for proposal, and would want data integrity so that and authentication so that the recipients of the request for proposal knew they were really dealing with a government ordering officer and knew that the RFP in fact hasn't been modified. But confidentiality would not be applied because the government would want the widest distribution. On the flip side, when the bids come in from the companies, the government would insist on integrity and authentication so there would be legitimate bids coming in, and the bidder would want to protect the bid and so would apply confidentiality. So you can see a case where this is not always that important. And the final service, sort of the tongue twister, proof of origin, proof of delivery, did all the parties in the transaction say they participated, whether it's a go-to-war message from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs to the troops. I don't want the troops to say, I never got the message. In fact, this service would say, yes, you did, or whether this is a contract and you don't want any party to be able to back out of a contract. So those are the basic security services that need to be applied in this complex networked environment. To further parse down the problem, we've looked at it in a historic way of let's do the best we can to protect systems. Let's keep building bigger and bigger walls around networks, bigger and bigger and stronger barriers to penetration. Well, the reality is the complexity of the networks. The keynote speaker, I think, made a marvelous analogy this morning in terms of that complexity, says that you can't have perfect protection. And so the idea of being able to detect when you're under attack and then be able to take some restoration activity is vital. So we have really a continuation or a spectrum of activities that's going to be essential in order to bring about information assurance. So you're not going to get these 5 security services unless you begin to think about a continuum of protect, detect, and restore, where the ultimate restore might be a disconnect from the system, so I'm no longer capable of being attacked because I'm disconnected. Of course, now I've lost service, or come back and adjust the protection mechanisms. Now, in order to attack this problem in a manageable way, it's been pretty much universally, at least in the Defense Department and other parts of government, broken down into 3 very important and I would say critical chunks that can't be dealt with by themselves. So security is an interdisciplinary activity. I know that's the theme of CERIAS, and I fundamentally support that, of things I need to do with people in terms of security awareness, in terms of certifying system administrators, in terms of their capabilities. It has to do with technology, and that'll be the focus of most of the talk this afternoon. And it also has to do with this 24/7 or online detect, react, respond, what we've called in the Defense Department, and I think what's catching on outside, defensive information operations. The idea of being able to detect and respond on a real-time basis. And so it takes, in fact, all 3 of these working in concert in order to bring about information assurance or to do protect, detect, restore. We need policy. The Department of Defense in particular is today just awakening to the need for modernizing its policy. Its policy base in the past had been based on predominantly confidentiality brought about by encryption. And it's heartwarming to say that in the last 6 months, DoD has moved forward and has, in fact, put together a policy that is much more comprehensive, that, in fact, not only addresses protect, but detect and restore in the same document. So there's much movement there in terms of bringing about a framework that can really bring together the people, the technology, and the defensive information operations. Now, when we talk about technology, about a year ago, I began to think about how one could put their arms around the technologies that are relevant to information assurance. And maybe this construct is flawed in a couple of respects, but I think it began to help us think about how we want to deal in a partnership with industry to bring the right technologies to the protect and detect restore space. There's a set of technologies that are what I'll call security technologies per se. Their existence is solely because there's the need for security. I could put cryptography in here. I could put firewalls, intrusion detection. You wouldn't acquire one of those devices if you weren't thinking about security. There's another set of technology that's very important, and I'll just listed 3 of many, many examples. Electronic mail or messaging, web browsers, electronic commerce. These are functions that people need to perform, and these are pieces of software, pieces of code that people need to buy, and they happen to have security as a feature. But you didn't buy these products because of security. You bought them because you wanted to do email or web browsing. But as a matter of fact, you can take advantage of embedded security. By the way, I coined a couple phrases here, commercial off the shelf and government off the shelf, to give a sense for where this technology flows from. And in this case, it's a lot of government development. Our agency builds encryption devices, and we have for the last 30 years. And so GOTS is here, government off the shelf. And there's an emerging set of vendors who are offering commercial off-the-shelf technologies. This is almost all COTS. Now, the government's not in the email business or the web browsing business or e-commerce, etc. So these technologies come almost all from the commercial space. And then there's the third and very large and quite insidious space in terms of technology. It's neither security per se nor security enabled, but is a source of vulnerability. This is where the attackers go. In fact, if I want to attack a system, I go here before I ever come over here and try to attack your stronghold. I'll look for the weak spots. And so, as a community, this is a space where we have a lot of work to do in order to bring countermeasures to this space, and this is huge, and in fact is the essence of information technology. So we have a big problem in terms of bringing technology into the security world. Now, to address this big problem, we conceived of 3 different, whoops, came up. What happened there? You didn't take over again. No more Purdue jokes. A common security language. One of the problems, if we want to talk about user needs and vendor claims, can we talk the same language? Can we describe the needs, the security needs, and the vendor can describe the claims in a language that allows comparison, so you know how well the claim is against the need. So that begs for a common security language. We also need a framework, something that talks about how things get hooked together, what are common protocols, what are common interfaces, how one might capture security across a broad, complex networked environment. So a framework is important. And then, of course, you need the technology itself. And I will claim, and this is something we're pushing, the idea of knowing something about the security goodness of that technology, which comes about through evaluation. So someone needs to look at it. In fact, it needs to be a third party, not the vendor who's claiming, but you want a third party like a Consumer Reports that looks at the technology and makes some statement about its goodness. And finally, all these are pieces and they need to be put together. Composition is important here, and so information assurance solutions are in fact more than a single product. They're a concatenation of, or composition of a set of products. I'll hit this slightly. So common language, real quickly. Some time ago, many of you might have been familiar with something called the Orange Book. At least that ring a bell with some of you. Okay, the Orange Book had a time in the sun, but actually in the mid-90s it became very obvious that its time had passed, predominantly because it was built around the monolithic computing environment and not the network computing environment for the most part. And so another language has arisen. It is now an international standard, ISO standard 15408, that in fact provides a way of describing security functionality, encryption, access control, et cetera, and a somewhat subtle but very important ingredient called how confident am I that the functionality has been implemented correctly, or what are the confidence building measures that have taken place that would give one confidence that the functionality is actually working properly. And this comes about through testing, comes about through configuration management, comes about through design and development processes, capability maturity model kind of software development, et cetera. With a dictionary, which is what the common criteria is, one can then write two books. One can describe the needs in terms of security in a book called A Protection Profile. Don't ask me to defend the choice of that particular name, but that's the name that the fathers of the common criteria used to describe sort of the entity who needs security. It allows a description of the functional and the assurance requirements. There's another book that can be written, and it's sort of the vendor's claim, or the I will provide. And so I have now the ability to generate a need statement and a claim in the same language, which allows me then to make a comparison between the need and the claim to see if I have the adequate security there. It was very important to the vendors of the information technology space I described earlier to be able to have evaluations conducted once. It's too expensive. This is generating assurance, which usually means documentation and configuration management, is an expensive proposition. And so the companies said, we will only want to do this once, and so we cannot have multiple evaluation schemes in multiple countries where if I want to sell in Europe, I have to be evaluated in 2 or 3 countries, and I want to sell in the US, I have to be evaluated there, and if I want to sell in Canada, I have to be evaluated there. And so the idea of a mutual recognition arrangement wherein the language is common across, at least at this point, the US, Canada, UK, Germany, France, Netherlands, Australia, New Zealand, and the ability to recognize the evaluations across those countries. And so if a product is evaluated in the US, it will be listed on the evaluated products list of the other countries. It doesn't say you have to buy a US product, or it doesn't say US has to buy any one of the other products, but it does say that the evaluation will be considered valid. And I think that's an important point for the vendor. So without that, the vendors really aren't going to be interested in participating in this program. So this is the common language. The second point in the process is a framework. So we'll go back to the oversimplified picture of the network environment. And what we need is a protect and defend capability in the backbone, predominantly I would say to provide availability or to counter denial of service attacks. We need something that can protect and defend at the boundaries. This is where firewalls and intrusion detection can take place. We need something that can work on the inside, host-based intrusion detection, host-based firewalls, personal firewalls, which are on the market today, authentication between clients and servers, so that only the chairman of the Joint Chiefs maybe be able to go in and and place a go-to-war order in the go-to-war message server, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, the idea of being able to manage all of this security with a common cryptographic and / public key infrastructure. In fact, as soon as you introduce one of these elements, you buy in to the need for some sort of security management infrastructure because it's vital. And so while, again, this is oversimplified, this begins to describe some sort of defense in-depth capability. It says you can't rely on any one point in the network for security. In fact, good security is going to require a series of defense in-depth or concatenated or layered countermeasures. And so we need technology in all these spaces. And in some cases, the technology is going to be stronger or weaker, and they're going to have to be put together in a way of compensating, because you can't find perfect security almost anywhere. And so all of this is, in fact, a compensated risk management environment. What we've done, then, is combine two thoughts. We've taken the defense in depth, and these are those same defense in depth themes across the top here, and the common criteria syntaxed or language, and began to write a series of protection profiles that are aimed at providing statements of need for the government, and in some cases leveraging communities beyond the government because I think it's very important that from a vendor perspective we find the right business case, the right return on investment. And quite frankly, in many cases, the Defense Department's market is not big enough to garner the investment of industry. However, the Defense Department, the banking community, the energy community, the transportation community would create a large enough market. So the idea of a synergy or a combination of market is what we want. And so we are generating these profiles. We have conducted a number of, I would say we're in the order of about 10 forums on every 8-week basis in Maryland near the Baltimore-Washington International Airport. And I would invite you to go to the website there. The URL is listed here. It's a password access. It's right now limited to U.S. citizens, and it so far had been limited to industry. But I think it would be useful, Gene, to expand this, particularly in your community here, to allow comment on these protection profiles. I'll also highlight the smart card one because I put this up because the smart card users forum, actually sponsored by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, has brought into play MasterCard, Visa, Eurocard, JBC, and a couple others, and they are generating a protection profile for smart cards. Paget?
That's the old URL. The new one is iatf.org.
Yeah, you can get there here, and it'll link you there. Now, we changed the, Paget brings up a good point, we changed the title of the forum from the Network Security Framework to the Information Assurance Framework. However, I think you can get there this way or through the IATF. So this is an important area. I'm not convinced we're going to be able to write enough protection profiles fast enough to keep pace with technology. So I'm not saying this is a panacea, but it is a way, when we can, to begin to write statements of need. And this is a lot of work. This is not trivial activity. Oops. Third piece, evaluations. In the past, we tried to do that work at NSA, but quite frankly, the technology pace and the breadth is outstripping a fixed resource. And so in the 1997 timeframe, we formed a partnership with the National Institute of Standards and Technology called the National Information Assurance Partnership, and I'll apologize for not spelling that out, NIAP. And that is a joint body that, in fact, worked with the common criteria and generated an evaluation scheme in accordance with the common criteria and established then a set of U.S. laboratories that are capable or accredited to conduct security evaluations in the common criteria context. So there's two parts to this. There's a government part which accredits labs, oversees the evaluations, does certain reviews to maintain quality, and because we want, again, we're in an international agreement now and an arrangement, and we want to make sure the quality is sort of up to snuff across the community. Allows then the labs to conduct evaluations on a contractual basis with vendors. So the price here is at the vendor. The vendor generates a product, makes a security claim, writes a security target, submits that to the lab, forms a contract with the lab. The government's not a part of that contract, and the evaluation is conducted. It's possible that there will have been a protection profile or a need statement generated for that product or that system, and if so, the lab is also capable then of comparing whether the claim meets the need. Output then is a validation certificate. Yes, this product meets its claim. There can be a validated products list, it's a list of products that have been evaluated, and a validation report is published, and it's, again, all under the mutual recognition context. If the product meets a government protection profile, then we will post another list, be a subset of this list, and these are the subset of these products that have met, in fact, protection profiles. 4 or 5 firewalls have gone through this process. There's probably another dozen products in the evaluation scheme, and again, here's a website that can give you a lot more insight into that. The last piece has to do with composition. It's clearly a very difficult problem. I can rack and stack evaluated products. I never will have in my security suite all evaluated products. I'll have lots of unevaluated products. If you recall on that bubble chart about the three spaces for technology, there'll be a whole bunch of things that I'll never be able to evaluate. And so the real question is, I've got all the stuff. Some of it I know something about through an evaluation process. Some I don't know something about. Am I able to compose a solution out of that? And the answer is yes. And what it may involve is another evaluation or another look at the composed solution. And even that's insufficient because this is complex, this is hard, and save for a community like this and a few others around the world, there aren't too many who really understand this technology. And so in addition to product, we as a supplier of information assurance need to generate what I'll call services. We need to take along with the product a set of requirements, definition, policy generation. We need to have a discipline called systems security engineering, so an individual can look at a situation, look at an environment, a real computing environment, a real policy, and say, now what can I do to bring better security posture to this? It's an art, not a science, and so we're growing as we begin to involve ourselves with a whole series of real-world applications out here. Risk analysis is a part of this. There's certainly no perfect security solution, so every accreditation in a system context out here, it will be a risk decision. How are those risk decisions made? What criteria does one use? When do I have enough data to say good enough to go? What happens the day after I make the accreditation and some $39 piece of software gets put in the system that changes the profile, the security profile? So hard work here. Again, ripe for critical thinking and creative minds. A system security analysis, I mentioned that earlier. It's good to have a product evaluated, but what about the system? Integration and test. And I've left off things like configuration. In fact, maybe one of the more important ingredients in any of these products is configure them correctly and sustain that configuration. Many cases we've been involved with a firewall accreditation, and the product is installed and accredited, and then 3 weeks later you get a call and it says, someone says, you know, this firewall isn't working the right way. And I said, well, send the config file. It looks entirely different than when we left it. Well, it worked faster, and so we kept tweaking it. Well, yeah, but it's not it's Swiss cheese now. And so the idea of configuration guides, very critical. All hard work, takes lots of people, lots of talent, and quite frankly, the world isn't ready yet, I think, in terms of all the talent we need to bring about a good security posture. So it's vital that we have an endeavor like CERIAS that's growing people, creating awareness. The fact that you have a K through 12 program is immense. There's at least one K through 12 teacher in the room. I know exactly who she is. And it's marvelous that we're beginning to grow this awareness at the lower levels all the way up. So I guess my bottom line before Vic comes up is we at the agency are dedicated and committed to a partnership across the total spectrum of activity that's necessary here. Obviously, I've talked a lot about the vendor partnerships we have. We're engaged with all of the users, and I've tried to depict here sort of the critical infrastructure with maybe a slight slant toward defense, but not exclusively. And of course, the international activity. And of course, note here I found another icon. Spaff, you missed the hat. I wore a hat earlier, a Purdue hat. You missed that. So you even got the colors right here, I hope. So I'll stop here. We can take a couple questions, or do you want to hold them to the end? I don't know how you want to do this, because Vic McConaughey wants to talk a little bit about the education outreach part of our activity. So okay, let's give Vic his chance. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Unlike Mike, I'm not a Purdue grad, but I have to tell you something. I'm quickly becoming a Purdue fan. One of the reasons for that is, for our agency coming out and move that way. But it's just one example of the way we need to reach out and form the bridges and build the partnerships with academia. The people that are out there really kind of doing things. And Mike mentioned the President's plan. That within the NSA, we have a program that the President cited for doing that outreach, with a special emphasis on partnering and bridging with the university systems. They're critical to the success and the security of our country. Now, the other thing Mike had in his presentation, he had a nice Venn diagram for you that showed policy and practices. Remember that with personnel? Right. Well, this is the educator's view. Right. Technology is only going to solve so much. We're just now discovering that. And even if we build the most robust technology that we have today, it's flawed. And so we need to build operations and policies and procedures that make the implementation of that technology at least a little bit more secure. But fundamentally, it all goes away unless we have in place these sound awareness training and education programs. In fact, there's some of us that now contend that if any three of those are missing in your solution set, you in fact introduce a vulnerability into your system and into your programs. What are the implications? One just simply has to look at that latest attack that occurred back in February, the flooding attack. And when you begin to do an analysis from a human dimension, in order to solve the problem, look at all the things you need to bring to bear. You need to have a fundamental understanding of computer science, the engineering, to understand the pathways, an understanding of information assurance, which Mike did a good job in showing you the spectrum that we're now looking at, as opposed to the in-depth, only one channel kind of solution set. But over here, look what's emerging. A whole new set of things that need to be integrated into the solution set. What are the legal aspects of this? What can we do? Was this an act of war? Or was it a crime? How can we tell? And what kind of psychological profile can we get so we can take a look at who or what entities engage in these kinds of things? We have really entered the era of interdisciplinary requirements in the educational arena in this area. Here's a commerce study. And briefly, what these figures say is that, and notice there's no IA called out in here, it's a subset in here. This is the demand across the United States from a 1996 to a 2006 projection, the numbers, and then you can see the deficits. And what they did was they took into account the number of jobs they anticipate being created, as well as the aging workforce leaving. Those are big numbers. They're so big that even if it's statistically flawed, in other words, if, for instance, if there's a category there that perhaps would not be considered an IT or one that they skip, it's significant. And going on, that's what that equates to in terms of a growth rate. The number of core IT workers, just not IA, but IT workers is projected to grow from 1.5 million in 1996, which was a baseline rate, to 2.6 million. That's a lot of workers the United States needs. So our ability to protect the national information infrastructure is now impeded. It's impeded by our capacity to produce the numbers. Hence, the government swinging in to advocacy, promotion, partnering with academia. That's what those deficits come out to. And with those deficits comes an increased awareness that when we build these programs, we need to incorporate a lot of different kinds of what I call thinking sets. And taken collectively, I think that the new information assurance warriors, whether they're in government or industry, are going to look a lot different than the ones we have today. They're going to be multidisciplinary thinkers who bring to bear, yes, some of the very traditional kinds of things that we do in information assurance, like cryptography and formal methods and software engineering, but also bringing into bear other dimensions, such as writing, which perhaps they don't take a look at right now to the depths that they should. And another area that's emerging is how to make a business case so we can put in place and get the resources that we need. We're not going to do this alone. It's not going to be simply a government and to academia kind of relationship. I look at it this way. If industry has one perspective on the IA problem and one perspective on the solution set, so does government, and it may not be the same. And you blend into that mix, or the triad, the academia, perhaps more ethereal in their solution sets, but together, collectively, if we drove that collective knowledge outward, we would have an impact on the entire American workforce. That's where the solution set is going to have to eventually evolve to and reach. That's the enormity of the problem that we're facing today. And so people say, okay, what is a good role for government in this area? Well, first of all, we're a provider of services. The dates passed, but how many people here use the electronic filing for the IRS? We provided that service. We influence the creation of architectures. One needs only look at the purchasing power of the commercial off-the-shelf environment that Mike mentioned. Yeah, we have influence there. But more importantly, I think that the national plan that Mike has mentioned and I alluded to calls that government needs to stand up, government needs to set an example. We need to turn to all areas to get solution sets to solve that. Thus, it's only natural that we provide leadership through partnerships, like we've just discussed. Partnerships that in the first round included only 7 universities across America. And as of Monday, I can now announce that there are 7 more in our numbers. All right? To include 2 defense universities, which have joined the ranks. That's a small number when you look across the vast fabric. And yes, there's some breadth between the operational capabilities, but they all have and have met certain criteria that put them into a category that says, yes, there are centers of studies there. But just think of that. In all the universities in America, we only have 14 that we've identified today. And so just in quick closure, that's what our National Executive Education and Training Program is about. I think it's a bold endeavor, a kind of new move, kind of new outreach for the agency to look at. And we're looking forward to even more partnering with tremendous centers like SPAP. So that's sort of the capstone or the human element to all the kinds of things that Mark talked about in terms of the policy and the technical dimensions of those challenges. And again, on behalf of the NSX, it's been a privilege to come back here and dialogue with you all. And that's just the beginning. So thank you very much.
talked out.
Would you comment on why the number of universities that on this list only includes one OPE university? Why is that? Why are there not any states about Harvard and
Well, on the next round, I haven't included, we have picked up several other leading universities. I can sell Carnegie Mellon.
why was it one? Was there logical academic environment factors?
I can only speculate on why they haven't applied, but we do have intents for them to apply to be judged next year. So they're evolving to see merit in the program. That's all I can do is speculate.
Well, if there are no other questions, thank you all for coming, and those of you who attended some of the sessions today and yesterday, thank you very much. We really appreciate you coming. Wish you all safe travels home for those of you who aren't in the area. Have a great holiday weekend. For those of you who are here at Purdue, we will see you next week here at the seminar for the speaker, the last one of the semester. And we will resume the seminar series again in the fall, although it will be a change. For the first time in 7 years, we will be offering the seminars on Wednesday afternoons. And this is due to a variety of reasons. Some of you have actually indicated this is a preference. So that is available if you're registering. You can still register for the CS 590E, and that will be on Wednesday afternoons in the fall. So thank you again, and thank you again to our speakers. We really appreciate it.